Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. This is Al24 News, streaming live from the capital Algiers, and coming up next in our news program. European Union leaders will meet to discuss the buildup of troops by Russia on the Ukrainian borders. EU officials claim this is not a reaction of any particular development, but to exchange views and update each other. US President Joe Biden said that a Russian invasion remains distinctly, possibly. On the other hand, Secretary of the State Antony Blinken warned of swift and firm response from the US and its allies over the Russian troops buildup. Russian leader President Vladimir Putin welcomed constructive talks Wednesday with the Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, who was his first official trip to Moscow, defying US concerns amid the Ukrainian crisis. And Honduran ex-president Juan Orlando Hernandez, whose extradition is sought by the United States for alleged ties with drug traffickers, surrendered to police Tuesday after a judge ordered his arrest. On Wednesday, members of the European Union met to debate the latest development related to Russia's military activities near Ukraine. Parliament President Roberta Metsola underlined how the European Parliament has repeatedly expressed solidarity with the people of Ukraine as they continue to face uncertainty and threats of a potential invasion. More with Nabil Khazin.
This crisis not only affects Ukrainians, not only the Europeans, it affects the direction of humankind.
Amid intense international diplomatic exchanges to de-escalate tension in Ukraine, the European Union meeting discussed the most globally debated issue that has a direct relation with the EU's security, namely the crisis in the eastern part of the European bloc.
The extremely serious situation in Eastern Europe has crept into all our agendas. And allow me to lay out the range of actions taken by the EU to deal with this crisis in very close coordination with our allies. And let me explain how the European Council will approach our future decisions, whether in the short or longer term.
Energy was also on the table of the EU meeting. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen warned Russia not to weaponize the energy issue, adding that the EU has learned that it must diversify its energy sources and not to be dependent on Russian gas.
In case that the Russian leadership decides to weaponize the energy issue, we see at a time of high demand that Gazprom is restricting its gas supplies to Europe. We see a 10-year low in storage by Gazprom. We see no sales on the spot market. This is a strange behavior for a company that in times of skyrocketing demand and prices, they are not trying to maximize their profits. And this behavior has already damaged Russia's credibility as a reliable energy supplier.
On Thursday, European Union leaders will meet to discuss the buildup of troops by Russia on the Ukrainian border. According to EU officials, tomorrow's meeting is not a reaction to any particular developments, but to exchange views and update each other.
US President Joe Biden said that a Russian attack on Ukraine was and still very possible, but called for giving diplomacy every chance of success to resolve the crisis. Hussein Burkan, watch follow.
US President Joe Biden stated Tuesday that diplomacy has all its chances to succeed in resolving the crisis between Russia and Ukraine, despite the high possibility of Russian invasion. Biden added that the beginning of the withdrawal of Russian forces from the Ukrainian borders, as Moscow announced, would be a positive thing. Yet, it has to be verified, stressing that these forces, whose number is estimated at more than 150,000 soldiers, are still considered as a threat.
Yesterday, the Russian government publicly proposed to continue the diplomacy. I agree. We should give the diplomacy every chance to succeed. And I believe there are real ways to address our respective security concerns. The United States has put on the table concrete ideas to establish a security environment in Europe. We're proposing new arms control measures, new transparency measures, new strategic stability measures. These measures will apply to all parties, NATO and Russia alike.
Biden addressed Russian citizens by saying that they are not his enemy, stressing that neither the United States nor NATO poses a threat to their country. For her part, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki explained in a press briefing that President Biden is using all channels of diplomacy to solve this crisis.
It would be a de-escalation, a proven de-escalation at the border of Ukraine, where the Russians are pulling back their troops, where they are making clear to the global community, to the media, to the public, that they are not invading Ukraine and backing that up with actions.
It's noteworthy that the last couple of weeks, new and intense diplomatic efforts to de-escalate the rising tensions between Ukraine and Russia, after the latter demanded legally binding security guarantees from his Western partners and emphasized that any expansion of NATO eastward is considered as an existential threat.
In the midst of increasing tensions in Eastern Europe, Secretary of State for Defense of the United Kingdom Ben Wallace meets with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg and U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin in Brussels today to discuss the alliance's response to 130,000 of Russian troops massed on Ukraine's borders. The European Union has called on Russia to take concrete actions to de-escalate tensions in Ukraine region. On the other hand, Sergei Lavrov, Russia's foreign minister, has stated that if Britain imposes new sanctions against Moscow over the Ukraine situation, Russia will not hesitate to retaliate.
NATO defense ministers will meet today and tomorrow, facing critical challenges for European security, and we have heard the signs from Moscow about readiness to continue diplomatic efforts, but so far we have not seen any de-escalation on the ground. On the contrary, it appears that Russia continues the military build-up. And we have not received any response to our written document, our written proposals that we sent to Russia on the 26th of January, outlining the topics and items where NATO allies are ready to sit down and discuss with Russia and to try to find a political path forward.
Sergei Lavrov, who has been leading negotiations with NATO and the US, said in Moscow today hysteria of an invasion is puzzling to Russia, while accusing the allies of trying to dictate where Putin can position troops on his own territory. Miriam Zian on Watford.
Russia's foreign minister Sergei Lavrov on Wednesday said fears of a Russian invasion in Ukraine have puzzled Moscow. Lavrov told reporters during a joint conference with his Brazilian counterpart that the West feels entitled to dictate how we should behave, whatever we do on our territory, adding that this is a basic lack of education.
As for the observation of the continuing hysteria, of course, I wouldn't say it amuses us, but it profoundly puzzles us. The West feels entitled to dictate how we should behave, whatever we do on our territory. This is a basic lack of education.
Russia said Wednesday was returning more troops and weapons to bases, but NATO declared it saw no sign of a drawdown as fears that Moscow could invade Ukraine soon persisted. Russia has massed about 150,000 troops east, north and south of Ukraine, sparking Western concerns it was planning an attack. However, Moscow denies any such plans and said it was pulling back some forces and weapons this week, though it gave few details. Those claims have been met with skepticism from US and its allies, even as they seem to lower the temperature following weeks of escalating East-West tensions.
I hope that other Western countries besides the United Kingdom are more responsible players, and they will stop this attempt to provoke waves of sanction wars, and will not support it. In any case, the Russian government and, I'm sure, our parliament will not stay indifferent regarding what they do in the West.
безразличными к тому, что пытаются вытворять на Западе.
NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg said earlier today that he has seen no sign that Russia's withdrawal is genuine, adding that Russia actually appears to be increasing its forces.
After several diplomatic attempts to ease tension in Ukraine, Russia's spokesperson Dmitry Peskov says his country's President Vladimir Putin is willing to negotiate and that Moscow is open to diplomatic talks to solve the crisis. Nabil Khazini on Watch Follow.
These military activities near Ukraine's borders are, as Russia said, to be only ordinary military drills. But the West is not quite sure about that. Western leaders have repeatedly declared the war could start at any moment. However, they also think diplomacy can offer a breakthrough to the crisis.
We, in the past 10 days or so, we only continue to see a build-up, not a de-escalation. So we are open to diplomacy. That door to diplomacy is open, as we have said, and so that's what we want to be headed towards.
The door of diplomacy is open as well from the other side. Moscow, through its spokesperson Dmitry Peskov, said President Putin is willing to negotiate, while for the Kremlin, Ukraine crisis represents one of Russia's several security concerns.
Ukraine is just part of the problem. It's a part of the bigger problem for security guarantees for Russia, and of course President Putin is willing to negotiate.
Since the escalation of tensions in Ukraine, Kiev has become the Mecca of world leaders. Diplomacy is up to now the dominant way in tackling the crisis. The West expects all possible scenarios. The United States already started minimizing its staff at the US Embassy in Kiev, a step like many Russia sees as premature, and that it's too early to take such decisions.
Leader of the Labour Party of the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer, has stressed the importance of standing united with allies with the NATO in face of the Russian threat to Ukraine. He stressed that it is important that all political parties are united in relation to the Russian aggression. Let's have a listen over these words.
In relation to Russian aggression, and that's what we're talking about, it's very important that we stand united with our allies, united with NATO. It's also important that in the UK, our political parties are united against Russian aggression. But I do want to see the government going further in relation to sanctions. I don't think they've used the powers that they've already got as much as they should have done, and I don't think they've looked closely enough at their own donations. And I think any donations to the Conservative Party that have any link to Putin should be looked at very, very carefully. And I want to see further sanctions put in place as quickly as possible. And, been waiting for an economic crime bill for some time now. That needs to happen fast, and we'll push the government all the way on that.
And now to have a clear idea over the new updates within the hot potato nowadays, the Russian-Ukrainian tensions. Joining me live over the skyboard, Valentin Ryogoshki, who is a professor in the Department of International Relations and Social Sciences at the National University of Life and Environmental Sciences in Ukraine. Professor Valentin, thank you so much for being with us. And directly to the point, what would you say over the latest update within the Ukrainian border with Russia and Belarus? Is there a real withdrawing of Russian troops, or this is just a word of politicians, or just another protocol?
Russian authorities are saying that they do start withdrawing troops after the military maneuvers, after training. Well, we don't know if it is really the fact, because Americans saying that they do not see that. But there is definitely some positive steps, as, for example, Belarusian Minister of Foreign Affairs have contacted the Ukrainian colleague of him, Ukrainian minister, and even invited Ukrainian representatives to the maneuvers which are there on Belarusian side, where Russians and Belarusians participate in military trainings. But what is important, it's not whether they withdraw already forces, but that there should be improvement in relations, because nobody really planned to attack Ukraine. Our Ukrainian president, has said that there is no threat of attacking. It is a part of a special theater organized by both sides, by Russians and by the Western part. Russians are pressing on Ukraine and the West is pressing on Ukraine, not because they are afraid of Russian troops coming to Kyiv, and for that Americans and some others like Canadians withdraw their staff from the embassies to the Western Ukraine, but they want Ukraine to implement the Minsk agreements. They want to decrease the tension in Donbass. And this is a kind of joint efforts, what they use in order to press Ukrainian authorities into implementing these agreements. Between Russians and the West, definitely, there is understanding that they want to have this. More than that, I think that Mr. Biden, as well as Ukrainian President Zelensky, may get a Nobel Peace Prize for avoiding military escalation, for avoiding war, and for resolving long-standing problems in the east of Ukraine, when the eastern part of Ukraine...
Mr. Valentin, I beg your pardon, and I'm sorry to cut your train of thoughts, but what is your stand regarding the Russian security concerns, especially the ones related to NATO's expansion eastward?
Well, Russia was going back and back, making concessions to the West for the last more than 30 years. Because after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia was very weak and it was very much dependent upon the West. Now the situation has changed. Russian military forces are strong again, and in many aspects they are better prepared for the newest warfare than the West. That is why Russia is showing that the West should take into account Russian concerns. Well, very often the West was neglecting what it was promising to Gorbachev or later to the first Russian independent leaders. So now Russia behaves very often in an arrogant way. Maybe it's just lack of diplomacy, maybe it's just lack of tactical, practical approaches. Like, for example, Chinese, for thousands of years, they knew it's better to wait while the authorities depart, which
Mr. Valentin, there was an intense diplomatic effort in the last couple of months from both sides. In your opinion, there will be a de-escalation or there will be an imminent war?
Personally, I am absolutely sure that there will be de-escalation soon, maybe after a couple of rounds of new escalations, because in order to get Nobel Prize for peace, it's necessary to show how great was the threat. And also, I'm sure that the war was not planned and it cannot happen for many reasons. Russia cannot afford to attack Ukraine. It would be a repetition of the 1990 situation in Iraq, when Iraqi president was caught into a trap by attacking Kuwait. Russians can be criticized for many drawbacks in their political system, in their activities, but not for being stupid. They will not do that. I'm sure that there are two levels of politics now. One, some American and Western specialists in special operations, in psychological operations, are preparing for Russia this kind of a trap, like of Saddam Hussein, or trap for the Soviet Union in 1979
Mr. Valentin,
in the end, they are preparing.
Mr. Valentin, thank you so much for your clarification.
No more.
I'm sorry to cut your train of thoughts, but we do have a lack of time. So thank you so much. Appreciate it. Now, for a different matter, or within the same story, the president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, stated during a meeting with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, that the visit to Moscow is portrayed for the world that shows the growth that the two countries can have together, a special relation. Hussein Berkan.
Russian President Vladimir Putin stated that the meeting with his Brazilian counterpart, Jair Bolsonaro, yielded positive results. Putin welcomed Bolsonaro's visit in the Kremlin and described Brazil as a leading trade and economic partner.
This is your first visit to our country. I hope it will be successful and nice. We're re-establishing relations that were interrupted in one way or another by the coronavirus pandemic. At your direction, leading ministers of your government have been in Moscow, and today there is a 2+2 meeting of the ministers of defense and foreign affairs. We're active on international platforms as well. And despite all the restrictions, our trade turnover has grown by 87%. I'm very pleased to see you, Mr. President, and I hope the meeting will be useful, especially as Brazil is one of our leading, one might even say, leading trade and economic partners.
In turn, Bolsonaro described his visit to Moscow as a message to the world that relations between Brazil and Russia are really good.
Que foi acometida no dia de ontem.
I am very pleased. I am honored by your invitation. We feel solidarity with Russia. We have good prospects for cooperation in different fields, in particular in defense, in oil and gas, in agriculture. Ministers meet. I am sure that this visit of mine to Moscow is a signal to the world that our bilateral relations have good prospects for growth. I thank you for your gesture, for pardoning a Brazilian citizen last year. We're ready to cooperate, and I would like to express confidence that this visit, this meeting between us will be very productive.
The Kremlin had previously reported that the two presidents would discuss issues related to strengthening the strategic partnership between Russia and Brazil and developing trade, economic, scientific, technical, and cultural humanitarian cooperation, in addition to their discussion of the international agenda.
Concerned by the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, Ukrainian citizens are tired of living under the threat of invasion, and they are worried about a lack of diplomatic breakthrough. The government questions the withdrawal of troops from the borders. Virginia has more to clarify.
Ukrainian people are not ready to leave their homes in Kiev. However, the escalating tensions between Russia and Ukraine are pushing the citizens to consider leaving if Russia invades their country.
Every day I'm thinking about what to do with my family. As I go to Lviv, for example, to the western part of Ukraine, or go to a village where my parents of my wife live. They have a small house, but at least they have, for example, they have electric generator, they have solar panels, so at least we will have electricity, for example, and the fridge will be working.
Most citizens are tired of thinking about Russia's next move. For 8 years, they've lived with conflict in the east of the country between Ukrainian forces and Russian soldiers. However, the recent developing crisis is fueling a renewed sense of anxiety.
If there is an invasion, we will go to Western Ukraine. If there is a need to fight, my entire family will.
Russians are just showing off, making a fuss and play acting. They're not only influencing Ukrainian opinion, but everyone else. Russia will destroy itself if it invades.
Diplomatic efforts to avert a new war have seemed not providing any breakthrough. Moscow says that some of its troops are withdrawn from the border, but Ukraine's government is skeptical.
We keep hearing different statements from the Russian Federation, but we have a rule. We don't believe words said, we believe actions done. If we see the pullout, we will believe in the escalation.
Russia and Ukraine celebrated their friendship when this huge arch was built 40 years ago on a hill in the city. No Ukrainian wants a conflict, but history has taught them to be prepared.
Away off the European continent now, a Palestinian man had been shot and killed by the Zionist forces in the occupied West Bank village of Nabi Saleh. The health ministry said that during what witnesses described as confrontation between protesters and Zionist soldiers, the victim, identified as 19 years old Nihad Amin, who died after being shot by live bullets in the abdomen area shortly after arriving at the hospital. After Tigray rebels raped and killed women and underage girls, the victims declared that it was a brutal gang rape. The latest evidence of the toll exacted by the 15-month war, as the right watchdog said, interviewed 30 rape survivors and other victims of violence. Under an ex-president Juan Orlando Hernandez, whose extradition is sought by the United States for alleged ties with drug traffickers, surrendered to police Tuesday after a judge ordered his arrest. Osama Yadi reports.
Honduran police detained former President Juan Orlando Hernandez on Tuesday, escorted him from his home in handcuffs and chains, following a U.S. extradition request on drug charges that marked a dramatic fall from grace only weeks after Hernandez left power. The United States has asked Honduras to arrest and hand over its former president. Juan Orlando Hernandez has been accused in federal court in New York of receiving money from drug cartels.
Hernandez has engaged in significant corruption by committing or facilitating acts of corruption and narco-trafficking.
The extradition request said that since 2004, Hernandez allowed tons of cocaine from Venezuela and Colombia to travel through Honduras on its way to the United States, while protecting drug traffickers from investigation in exchange for millions of dollars in bribes.
The United States is advancing transparency and accountability in Central America by making public visa restrictions against Honduras' former president, Juan Orlando Hernandez, on account of corrupt actions.
Hernandez was repeatedly implicated as a co-conspirator in his brother's 2019 drug trafficking trial by New York prosecutors. The brother Juan Antonio Hernandez was found guilty of drug and weapons charges and sentenced to life in prison. According to the defense of Hernandez, Honduras' Supreme Court, which will decide on the extradition request, met on Tuesday and appointed a justice to oversee the case. The process could take between 2 and 3 months.
Officials says at least 18 people died in mudslides and flood caused by torrential rains that swept over a mountainous part of Brazil's Rio de Janeiro state, with fears that the death toll could grow as search continue to look for survivors. Around 180 soldiers who were operating in the affected Petropolis district received heavy rainfall in 3 hours on Tuesday. According to the state fire department, Brazilian president called his government to send instant support. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invoked the Seldom Used Emergencies Act on Monday, which allows the government to supplement local police forces with officers from the National Royal Canadian Mounted Police. However, some demonstrators refused to leave, and dozens of vehicles were still parked near Trudeau's office on Parliament Hill early on Wednesday. Islam Said has more to tell.
Invoked the Emergencies Act. 24 hours in, and there are more questions than answers.
I want to be very clear, Mr. Speaker. The scope of these measures are time-limited and geographically targeted.
Amid the 3-week-long blockade that sieged the center of Ottawa, the capital, the Canadian government has decided to take rapid action to clear the blockade by using new emergency powers.
And whatever it takes to get give the police the tools to go in there and get these people moving on. You know, guys, I get it. You know, everyone's frustrated. I'm just as frustrated as anyone else.
Weeks after authorities originally permitted hundreds of trucks to park in the city's riverbank center, protesters are still camped out on Parliament Hill. Peter Sloley, the chief of police in Ottawa, resigned on Tuesday, citing allegations that he was unable to control the protests, which have evolved into a larger anti-government movement against Trudeau.
I worked with the man. He's a fundamentally decent man, faced with a very difficult job, and frankly, I'm very saddened by this turn of events. And at the same time, I think there is an important job yet to be done to restore order and provide effective policing services to the people of Ottawa.
Some demonstrators are refusing to leave, and dozens of trucks were still parked near Trudeau's office on Parliament Hill early on Wednesday.
We're going to wait until the majority vote in Parliament Hill today before making a decision if to move over to Wellington or not.
According to police, there are only 360 vehicles in the city center, down from 4,000 during the height of the protests. Police have made 18 arrests and filed 33 charges.
The World Health Organization's European office called for increased vaccination efforts in Eastern Europe, warning that the Omicron tidal wave was heading eastward. The WHO's regional director, Hans Klosch, noted that in the last 2 weeks, COVID-19 cases had more than doubled in 6 countries: Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Georgia, Russia, and Ukraine.
На протяжении последних 2 недель
Vaccination remains our best defence against severe disease and death for all current COVID-19 virus variants circulating. However, too many people at greater risk remain unprotected. I call on governments, health authorities and relevant partners to closely examine the local reasons influencing lower vaccine demand and acceptance and devise tailored interventions to increase vaccination rates urgently, based on the context-specific evidence.
The Italian government passed a law that came into effect on the 15th of October, requiring all workers to show a COVID-19 certificate to access any workplace. Protests erupted all across the country in an attempt to reverse this decision and get back to work as normally as possible. More in this report.
Protesters of different ages erupted on the streets of Italy against the mandatory decision made by the government that requires all workers to show a COVID-19 health certificate to access any workplace. The certificate, also called the Green Pass, shows the holder is vaccinated or has recently tested negative. As for the category of workers who opted for the non-vaccine way, have to now pay for a test every 3 or 4 days, which some find absurd considering the high price of the test.
It's like going back to the Enlightenment era.
Workers of the age of 50 and above, as well as students, walked the streets of Italy showing their disagreement and concern about their future and their children's future.
My biggest fear now is that our country does not guarantee you as students any future. I don't want to be a temporary contract employee forever. I'm scared that I will never realize my dreams.
I work as teacher, but as a mother I am worried about my 19-year-old. We were expecting so much from the government concerning the job market, but it never reached our expectations.
This mandatory order has taken place from the 15th of February, is both applied to public and private sector for workers aged 15 or over, including foreign nationals, freelancers and the unemployed. The Italians are now saying that if the minister really meant that the country is changing for the better, then this is not what they expected.
According to allegation published in a pro-Beijing Chinese language media on Wednesday, Chinese President Xi Jinping has instructed Hong Kong's administration to take all necessary steps to manage the territory of Macron's fueled COVID-19 outbreak. The move adds to the burden on officials who are battling an outbreak that has submerged some hospitals. The families of 9 victims of 2012 mass shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Connecticut have agreed to settle a lawsuit against manufacturer of an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle used to massacre 26 and 7-year-old students and 6 educators. The gun manufacturer will pay $73 million to compensate the families of the victims. Miriam Zian has more to clarify.
Gun violence in the USA is still present. Sandy Hook families are one of the victims and cannot forget the Black 14th December 2012 incident when 26 people were shot and killed in the Sandy Hook Elementary School in Connecticut. The gun manufacturer company Remington will pay $73 million to settle the claims of the families who had sued it in 2015, saying they should have never sold such a dangerous weapon to the public. The manufacturer agreed in the settlement to allow the families to release thousands of documents they obtained during the lawsuit, including ones showing how it marketed the weapon. Josh Koskoff, a lawyer for the families, said at a media conference announcing the settlement on Tuesday that the plaintiff's focus was not on the money, but to prevent future mass shootings.
But this case was never about damages in the sense of compensation. It was about damages in the sense of forcing change. It was about damages in the sense of realizing the goals of these families to do whatever they can to help prevent the next Sandy Hook.
Nicole Hockley, the co-founder and CEO of Sandy Hook Promise Foundation, lost her 6-year-old son, Dylan, in the tragedy.
Nothing will bring Dylan back. The closest I get to him now is by kissing his urn every night, telling him I love him and I miss him. But I made him a promise, and I'll keep working to deliver that promise for the rest of my life. My hope for this lawsuit is that by facing and finally being penalized for the impact of their work, gun companies, along with the insurance and banking industries that enable them, will be forced to make their practices safer than they've ever been, which will save lives and stop more shootings.
The civil court case focused on how the firearm used by the Newtown shooter was sold, claiming it targeted younger at-risk males in marketing and product placement in violent video games. Adam Lanza used a rifle by Remington legally owned by his mother and killed her with it, then took it to school where he fired 154 rounds in 5 minutes before killing himself with a handgun. Sandy Hook was the country's 4th deadliest mass shooting. According to the Gun Violence Archive, which analyzes the data, it is part of an epidemic of gun violence and suicides in the US, which claimed about 45,000 lives in 2021.
According to UN officials, Yemen's 7-year war has reached a dangerous tipping point, with civilian casualties are the highest in at least 3 years in January, and 8 million Yemenis expected to lose all humanitarian aid next month unless urgent new aids are provided. Islam Seed on what follows.
Amid the intense conflict in Yemen, the United Nations officials have warned that at least 8 million Yemenis will possibly lose all humanitarian aid in the coming month, calling for urgent funds to be delivered. According to UN Humanitarian Chief Martin Griffiths and UN Special Envoy Hans Grudenberg, January has seen nearly 2/3 of major UN aid programs being closed while conflict increased.
And I therefore urge the parties to prioritize the needs of Yemenis and de-escalate the fighting. And I hope that they will take this opportunity to actively engage in our consultations, develop the framework, and work with me to chart a path out of this conflict towards a political settlement.
Grudenberg has pointed to an alarming increase in air raids in Yemen, including residential areas in Sana'a and the port area of Hodeida. The conflict in Yemen has to be contained by Yemenis parties and the international community efforts.
If you look at what I am trying to achieve is to lay the foundations for a sustainable solution of the conflict in Yemen that has not been there for quite a number of years, if you look back.
Griffiths cautioned that aid agencies are quickly running out of money, forcing them to slash life-saving programs. UN Humanitarian Office has also reported the humanitarian plan for Yemen in 2021 received $2.27 billion, out of a total of $3.85 billion, the lowest level of financing since 2015. The plan for the 2022 has yet to be revealed. 3.6 million people could be run down of safe drinking water as a result of funding shortfalls, as well as programs to combat gender-based violence and improve reproductive health.
Al-Shabaab militants have launched simultaneous attacks on police stations around Somalia's capital, Mogadishu, overnight, killing 2 girls and wounding over a dozen people. Security officials says once they heavily armed men stormed a police station in Kaksa districts in the middle of the night, exchanging gunfire with security forces. In Chile, an arson attack carried out by hooded individuals in the Los Rio region left a total of 19 trucks with trailers burned and 700 square meters warehouse destroyed. Early Tuesday morning, the local prosecutor's office in Mariquina began work to locate those responsible for the attack that took place inside the Marco Salgado company, which provides services to fosters in the area. And now for more international news, let's follow this roundup by Sofiane Kantouri.
In the case of fresh full-scale Russian invasion, Hungary is prepared to take tens of thousands of prospective migrants from Ukraine. This was declared by Gulayes, the leader of the Prime Minister of Hungary's government. He emphasized Hungary's desire to avert a full-scale conflict between Russia and Ukraine. However, he stated that if necessary, his country could accommodate tens of thousands of potential Ukrainian refugees. The computer network of Ukraine's defense ministry and 2 banks were swamped, prompting Ukraine's Information Security Center to blame Russia. The Ukrainian Center for Strategic Communications and Information Security, which is part of the Cultural Ministry, said in a statement that it's not excluded out that the aggressor adopt techniques of tiny dirty tricks, because its aggressive plans are not working out on broad scale. The European Union's top court cleared the way on Wednesday for the organization to slash billions of euros in aid to Poland and Hungary, whose nationalist leaders are accused of abusing democratic rights by the group.
There is no appeal to the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg, which dismissed Warsaw and Budapest's appeal to a new EU sanction that would withhold money to numbered nations that disobey European laws. British police announced that they had launched an inquiry into media reports alleging that a Saudi national was granted honors in exchange for payments to one of Prince Charles' organizations. In September, the Sunday Times revealed that Saudi businessmen had received an award for donating thousands of pounds to projects strongly backed by Charles with the help of the Prince staff.
Listen, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. L24 news program is still rolling, so stay tuned for further details. See you and have a blessed evening.